This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Our next speaker is Claire Taylor, who's a professor of Hispanic Studies at the University of Liverpool. She's published widely on women writers earlier in her career, but has, in more recent years, been a real pioneer in looking at cyber literature and digital cultures online. And her own single-authored book on this issue is imminent, she tells me, but she also has a fine co-authored book with Leah Pittman, published by Routledge, which came out last year. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing more of that in the paper.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak from Jordan. I'm going to be giving you a brief snapshot today. This is part of a broader research project I've been working on for several years, looking at what happens when, broadly speaking, cultural and literary artefacts clash or meet with technology. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to focus specifically on the literary ones of those. So I'm not going to talk about other things that I've worked on, such as net art. I'm going to talk specifically about literary formats. But my focus here will be on works that are born digital, works that are created, literary works that are created specifically to have online and or offline digital elements. So not books that are just then available as a PDF. So what I'm talking about and what I hope to get across today is that what I'm very much interested in, and this is my new project, so my next book that I'm working on, I'm looking at how online literature, so digital literature, speaks both to the language of new technology, but also speaks back to a very, very rich literary cultural heritage. So some of the works I'll be showing you very briefly, you'll hopefully see some examples of how there's negotiations with existing literary genres, and there's a variety of works on a continuum. So some works will be very, very technologically enhanced, some of them will be often remashing existing or older literary texts. And what I want to argue today that the works that we can see online, so online literary works, cyber literature for want of a better term, speak back to a rich Hispanic literary tradition of experimentation. So in other words, what I want to get away from is this idea that you go online and everything's newfangled and bells and whistles and it's all completely revolutionary. What I want to show you today is how a lot of the experimentation online, in fact, it's continuing the sorts of things that people did in previous generations of literary experimentation. So new media genres, in other words, don't exist in a vacuum. I'm going to show you some examples today. We've got dialogue with pre-literary movements. Some examples in a Hispanic context, we've got a lot of dialogues with poesía concretista, with caligramas. There's some, you can read back some of the trajectories to some of the things that Huidobro did. The testimonio and the crónica. There's lots and lots of literary pre-digital precedents. Let me see. So, new hybrid forms, what I'm going to be talking about today, I won't have time to talk you through all of these, but some examples of things we see online. Twitter poetry, electronic ballads, blog, aforismos, and hypertext short stories. I'll be talking you through the first 4 of those. But there are many others I could also talk about, so blog novelas, the novela colectiva, hypertext short stories I've done twice, hypertext documentary, so there's lots of different forms online. And I'll show you at the end, you can follow some more links if you want to find out about the vast and very rich database of works that you can see people are doing that I don't have time to look at today. And then we've also got the anipoemos and microrelatos. So I'm going to talk to you first about Twitter poetry. So what does this involve? Well, this is actually a growing and popular genre, not just within the Hispanic world, but worldwide. Some examples, Jason Camlot's Tickertext 1 and 2 from 2010, and Heaton Twitter poetry from 27 onwards. And what it does, to sum up, it makes use of Twitter's formal aspects, particularly the restriction to 140 characters. So in other words, it's using that as a creative restriction. And clearly it draws on the traditions of the haiku. In fact, there is a hybrid genre called the twaiku, inverted commas, and there are twaiku competitions on Twitter if you are so inclined to want to go and write your own twaiku. So it uses this Twitter poetry, obviously, it makes use of these formal aspects, is what I'm going to be arguing. So in the same way that the haiku had very close and restricted formal restrictions, but the idea was that was a creative restriction, so too we see in Twitter poetry, but also the creative use of digital aspects. So Twitter poetry does allow for retweetings and linking of Twitter content to other social media platforms. So my example is Eduardo Navas. I'm going to be talking you through. Eduardo Navas is of Salvadoran extraction, but is a Latino and currently lives in the States. I'm going to talk you through his poemita, which I can just show you, providing it doesn't go offline. I can just show you this in real time in just a moment. Okay, my links have disappeared. I can show you this. It will open for us in a second, hopefully. So this is what his poemita looks like. This is Eduardo Navas using Twitter for experimental poetry. So, what is poemita? Well, it's a collection of individual micro-poems that Navas has been writing over several years on Twitter. When you read through his poems, you can see there are several shared themes. His poetry is often about new media technologies themselves, so it's very self-referential. It's often about the poetic medium, about how to write poetry, and it's often involving political statements. So I've chosen just one example. This is one of his micro-poems, one of his poemitas. Once upon a time, a cloud became the paradigm of quantification, okay, which might seem rather obscure to begin with. Of course, what he's doing here, and this is frequent throughout his Twitter poetry, he recycles time-worn literary tropes, obviously the once upon a time, eras una vez, no? But also he's playing with a classical feature of the haiku. Classical haiku demands that we include a natural image in our haiku, and he's done that with a twist. Obviously, we've got the cloud as the central feature, the central imagery of this haiku, or our poem, but of course it's actually tag clouds he's talking about. He's talking about keyword metadata and how it's quantified and visualized. So this is an example of a poet using new media technologies to then reflect upon those same technologies themselves and also to rethink literary form. So that's just one very brief example. I'll be showing you some others in just a moment. So that was Twitter poetry, electronic ballads, and this is me stretching the term ballad, so those medievalists amongst you might want to pick me up on this. But I'm going to use some examples from Lindsay, who's an Argentinian and Spanish author, born in Argentina but currently living in Spain. I'm going to be talking through her work, 2011 work, RadicalKaraoke. What is RadicalKaraoke? Well, we can have a quick look here, this work. I'll be opening that in the background and we'll come and have a look at her RadicalKaraoke in just a moment. Bear with me a second while I put this back. Right. So RadicalKaraoke, what she does in this work, she remixes set phrases and commonplaces. So she's taken a series of commonplaces that she's from political discourse that she's then collected, and she sets up these algorithms that then turn it into, in effect, poetry or ballads. What we then do when you go into RadicalKaraoke, the user and the reader user, I'm using a reader user here because we're expected to activate the work. We create these remixes of voice, sound, images, and special effects as we go into this work. So the text appears across the screen, but we're expected to read it as it goes across the screen, and we press various buttons to generate, change colours, and also generate different sound effects and special effects. What she's doing, she's clearly drawing, I would argue, on a Hispanic heritage, rich heritage of ballads and oral poetry, because we are expected to vocalise the poetry as we access it. But of course, she's drawing on the technologically enabled karaoke. She's drawing on these two different genres there. So this is RadicalKaraoke, what it looks like. So you select entrar, and I will talk just a moment about this important feature here about the requiere de una cámara web. We'll have a look at why that's significant. So when you go into RadicalKaraoke, you're given 3 different options. You're given 3 different speeches that you can vocalize and play around with. Ex Africa sempre alicit novi, o mirar como que presume su anillo, we have no past, you have no present. You then go into these, and then you can probably see that there are these three different discourses. The first of this is, in fact, a quote from Pliny the Elder. Africa always bringing us something new, so a very exoticist cliche about the African continent. The second one is Kate Middleton Mania. It's taken from the press. Mirar como que presume su anillo. This is the moment when she was showing her engagement ring to the press and was appearing everywhere in hola, etc., etc. And then the last one, this wasn't one specific phrase, but it's an intertextual reference to punk, and in particular the No Future slogan of the Sex Pistols. So, This is an example of RadicalKaraoke, how it works. So this is me as a user playing around on the system. So what you get is you get various images that appear in the centre of the screen along the bottom of the screen. As you can see, you've got the karaoke text that you have to read out, vocalise as it comes along. But what we get, and this is what Gatti's wanted us to do, there's a deliberate contrast that the reader eventually creates between the text that we read and then the images that we're then mixing with it. So we have various different images that we can select and choose using the buttons on our screen. But for example, if I'm selecting the V6 button, the image that comes across is a video file of slaves pulling a large object. We're all trapped in the system of corporate capitalism. Whilst the text, what we're reading out, will be nosotros somos los protagonistas, so Gatti is wanting us to start to see the emptiness of the rhetoric that we are sitting in front of the computer and reading. Another one we've got, if you go into V4, you see images of a face with the eyes hypnotised, again, slave to technology and slave to the system. So this is something that throughout RadicalKaraoke we're expected to step back from the words that we're reading and expected to see that shock value. What I would have liked to have done now, but I can't because I can't take the computer into the audience, but then if you play through this system and you see lots of people who are trapped by the system, and if you select the very last one here, V7, what it does is it loads your webcam and you see yourself on the screen. You are another clone trapped within this system. So sorry that I've spoilt the punchline of this work for you. But the first time you do it is very shocking when you think, whoa. And you realise what Gatti's trying to do. She's trying to get you to stand back from your own position within this, caught within the system. So yeah, we're interpolated into the system and into the poetic critique itself. So, blog aphorismos. I'm going to now go back to Navas. I'm in fact using Navas and Gatti as my two examples here. So, Navas, in 2011, he set up a project called Minima Moralia Redux. And again, I've got the URL for you there. You can have a look at it yourself if you want in real time. What it does is it remixes and visualizes a text by Adorno, Minima Moralia, Reflexionen am beschädigten Leben, written in the 40s but published in the early 50s. And there are 153 aphorisms of Adorno's, and Navas's plan, his ultimate objective, is to be able to include all of those in his work. He's probably only about halfway through now. The Adorno's text was a pun on a treatise by Aristotle, Magna Moralia. And so Adorno, what he was looking at social practices, institutions, political and economic structures, and particularly the bourgeoisie and the fate of the individual. And I've taken a quotation from Bernard, just summing that up, but it was Adorno's attempt to spell out the alienation of the individual into its minutest ramifications in everyday life. So that's the text that Navas is using. And what does Navas do? Well, Adorno, what he was doing, he was speaking out against alienation and awakening the reader to his or her situation as being caught within the political and economic structures of the state in alliance with capitalism. So very much statist capitalism for Adorno in the 1940s and then into the 50s. But of course the very genre itself, the collection of aphorisms, is then undermined by the content. The book of aphorisms is a bourgeois genre. It's part of conduct literature. It tells you how to behave in different social situations. It's about telling you how to conform to the system. And what Adorno was doing, used the book of aphorisms against himself. He used aphorisms to try and tell you not how to conform, but the opposite, how to unmask these structures underlying social norms. So what Navas then does in his aphorismos, he creates these boxes of lexia, which he bases on Adorno's original, and he visualizes them, but he then creates a remixed visualization for the 21st century, which is very clever. You have to work quite hard to work out what Navas has done to change. So aphorism 14, Adorno, when you read, there's quite a big block of text, and partway through, Adorno's original says private life is also marked by this. Whereas Navas, if you look carefully, Navas has inserted quite a bit into the sentence, and Navas's private life is certainly marked by this quite inevitably, given the concept of private was originally conceived by the very system that now data mines it in the name of the emerging social media market. So this has been quite a big block of text, and you read it through and you suddenly think, I'm sure Adorno didn't know about social media. And you realise that's Navas adding things in. So in other words, just as Adorno is critiquing the medium of the aphorism, so Navas is critiquing the medium of social media. Navas never uses Twitter or blogs just for purely sort of their straight face value. He's constantly critiquing the very medium that he uses. So as an example, how this then works when we see the visualizations, which are the most kind of impacting, I guess, of these aphorismos. This is Navas's visualization of Adorno's, kind of the word cloud. You can see bourgeois is the predominant term there. But this is Navas's remixed aphorism for the 21st century, and it's now private. So, of course, it's private finance capitalism. It's no longer statist capital as it was for Adorno that becomes the critique for Navas. We're now looking at late capitalism. So, very, very exciting stuff there if you want to go and have a look and see what Navas does. And then my final example, returning back to WordToys. There were lots of other examples, but I've just used these two for comparison. So her WordToys in 2006. And again, the URLs for you there, but I'll be leaving, if anyone wants a copy of this, you can just simply copy down the URLs. That includes 14 individual short fictions. Some of them are poetic, some of them are more narrative-based. But just as one example, one of her short stories within this collection is called ¿Por qué se suicidó la señorita Chao? And then we have a story, and it's a response to the question posed in the title, but it's generated at random by an algorithm. And how this works, there's a sequence of lexia in different coloured fonts. And then the principal actors in the story, so la sociedad china, la señorita Li and sus padres, are then recombined along with its set phrases and outcomes. So as a user or reader, user/reader, you go in, press the button, otra respuesta, and you get another story, but based on these same preset actors and phrases within the story. So what Ballads is doing here, and this is very, very common to her work, she's constantly engaging and deliberately showing us the possibilities of new media technologies for literature. So in this example, we've got narrative multi-sequentiality as enabled by new media technologies. We've got also a questioning of the role of character within the narratology, because the character, in fact, mutates and takes different roles. But at the same time, and this is really common to Gacci, as I've said, she's constantly bringing us up to the limitations of these potentially liberatory new media technologies. So in fact, in this story, however many times you play or read the story, activate it, we always end the same concluding sentence. And this is, dado que la sociedad se ha tornado en extremo peligrosa, debemos estar alertas para evitar que nos infrinja a nosotros mismos su golpe final. So whichever we read, whichever these different people doing different things in the story, we always end up on the same conclusion. And it's in fact a citation from Mao Zedong, and this is part of the preface to the story, an article that he wrote. So we've got the sense that Gacci is talking us through here, that even though we have these different options, we've always come back to the same conclusion. And this is something very common to her. She's constantly pointing us out to us the possibilities, but also the limitations of digital technologies. If you have a chance to look at her work, have a go on Escribe tu propio Quijote. Have a go on that. It's great. I don't want to spoil it for you, but have a look, and that tells you exactly. It gives you a sense of where there are limitations. So yeah, have a look and see what she's done. It's very clever. So yeah, the notion that the conclusion is already pre-written. So this is something that comes across very much in Gacci's work, both exploring the possibilities, but also forcing us to realise the limitations. So in terms of my conclusions, I want to hopefully have shown you that it's a continuing dialogue between print and digital formats. So what we see online, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And that we've got literary experimentation online. We've also got the self-reflective status, so the majority of writers and artists who are producing literary works online often tend to include self-reflexive elements, talking about the digital medium itself and its possibilities, but also its failings. Frequently as well, there's an emphasis on the role of the reader in activating the work. So in each of those cases, the reader has to be involved in some way or another to further the story along. And often, as I mentioned, the critique of the limitations of digital technologies. Okay, so I'll take you on a whistle-stop tour. So what you might want to do to look at it more in leisure, if you have a look, I've got just short of 400 links on Delicious. If you want to have a look at those, not all of them are works themselves. Some of them will be secondary criticism on them. But have a look. I've categorised them by country, genre, etc., etc. And then you can also see anything new that I might be mentioning on Twitter. So I would certainly encourage you to try them out for yourself.
Thank you, Claire.